So I've been sitting on this topic for a few days now because I haven't been quite sure exactly how I wanted to approach it or what conversation I really wanted to have about it. But after thinking about it for a few days, obviously, I've kind of decided that it is something that I want to discuss with you guys and make a video about. And I think I know what perspective I want to come at it from. It's very interesting. It's an exciting time when it comes to this topic, but it's also very unique in a lot of ways. So, what we're obviously talking about has to do with last week's Nintendo Direct. We, of course, did finally get that September Nintendo Direct, and it was pretty divisive. I shared my thoughts. I didn't really find it to be all that exciting of a Nintendo Direct. Now, I'm not mad about it. It takes a lot to get me upset when I see a Nintendo Direct or a presentation that I don't really care for. But if I'm being honest, there just wasn't a lot of exciting new announcements for new games that we didn't know about before that Direct had aired. Now, as most of us also probably know, in the days leading up to the announcement and the airing of that Nintendo Direct, there were a lot of leaks and rumors that were going around out there, and it turns out that most of what was doing the rounds was actually true. One of the things initially discussed was that we might see F-Zero finally come back in some fashion. Now, you guys know I'm an older guy. I grew up in the 8 and 16-bit era, and so the original F-Zero was one of the most mind-blowing experiences I ever had, and I've been a huge fan of the franchise in every iteration of that series, basically the entire time I've been gaming, right? I even still own F-Zero GX on the GameCube, which is very widely believed to be one of, if not the best F-Zero game. I think it is the best F-Zero game. I love it. It is still beautiful and fun to play to this day. And so I am one of those F-Zero fans who would love to see a revival of the franchise. I'd love to see what Nintendo could do in the more modern era, whether it was a Switch title or a next generation Switch 2 title, whatever they wanted to do to maybe change up the formula but still capture the magic and the beautiful visuals of an F-Zero experience, again, on current gen or next gen hardware. It's very exciting and something I'd love to see. So it was a very tantalizing prospect that there were some believable discussions about an F-Zero revival coming from this Nintendo Direct. Now, a day or so before the Direct, I don't remember exactly how this got out there or where this was found. I actually can't remember. But the conversation switched from a new F-Zero game or an F-Zero GX remaster to maybe an F-Zero 99 online multiplayer only free to download game, which of course catches us up to speed because, as we know, it turns out that that is exactly what was announced and revealed at the Nintendo Direct. What seemed like a kooky, crazy, impossible, and personally very uninteresting idea, F-Zero 99, like it just didn't make sense in my brain and it seemed so weird. Why would Nintendo do that with F-Zero as opposed to something else? But it turned out that that is exactly what they were planning on doing, and they did reveal F-Zero 99, a 16-bit inspired online multiplayer only free to download game. And of course it was available that same day, shadow dropped after the Nintendo Direct, and a lot of us downloaded it and a ton of people have been playing it. So this is kind of what gets me to the main point and thesis statement of this video, right? The main meat of the discussion I want to break down, which is if F-Zero 99 can be some sort of indicator either to us, the fans, or to Nintendo and the success that they might see or what have you, on if Nintendo would be planning on revisiting F-Zero in a more official capacity with a new game or something more serious in the future. Is F-Zero 99 a hint at that, or is Nintendo maybe gauging some analytics about F-Zero 99 that could help show Nintendo that we have interest as fans in the franchise to help convince them to make another new game? That's the question, and I think that for the most part, I've seen people stating that, yes, this is a great thing that can help the franchise, and I certainly think in a lot of ways that's true, but I also don't think it's completely black and white either, and so I want to break down some of that. Now, I'm going to get candid with you guys for a minute and potentially get myself a lot of flack from a lot of fans and folks out there based on reactions I've seen online and on Twitter and whatnot, but I just want to be honest with you guys and let you know my initial thoughts on the game and the release and just how the game actually plays with the little bit of time I've spent on it. First and foremost, if you watched my prior videos, you already know how I feel. This isn't really the F-Zero game that I wanted, especially after a long hiatus with a franchise that's been in question. It would be different in a world where F-Zero was an active franchise and every couple of years or so, or maybe even once per generation, we can expect a new game, and this becomes a nice little free to download, multiplayer spin-off fun thing to just kind of add on to the ever-growing F-Zero lineup, right? But that's not the case. We're in a drought when it comes to F-Zero. In fact, the future of the franchise has been in question for 20 years. And so that's where, just to me as an F-Zero fan, what F-Zero 99 is and represents and its general setup, it's just not appealing to me, okay? It's not what I want. I don't really want online only. I'm not a big fan of this whole 99 Racers thing, or it's an elimination and you're sitting in matchmaking rooms and waiting for the next thing. As a mode to another game, I think F-Zero 99 could be a fantastic addition to a larger game, and have a lot more value. As it is now, it's not bad, and I'm going to get into that in a second, but I just want you to know it's not my preferred F-Zero experience. Now, what I will say is that I did download the game, and I have played a few races. I'm not going to lie, I haven't put in a ton of time into it, because like I said, it wasn't something I was super excited about. But I wanted to give it a download and give it a shot because I love the franchise and I love that people have been talking about it again and excited about F-Zero and playing and enjoying this game. And I'll be honest, there are a ton of positives I can take away from F-Zero 99. Most importantly, the gameplay is still excellent. In fact, even though it is 16-bit inspired and using the SNES courses, but just using the online multiplayer thing, I kind of feel like it's been a long time since I've played the original game. I feel like it almost plays and controls even better. And they have some spins and twists to the gameplay and the mechanics, and you can use this super thing where you create this floating course to kind of get ahead of some of the other competitors, and you've got the spin attack thing, and so they are making some unique changes to it for sure. But I have to say, it plays great. It looks great, because again, it is 16-bit expired, but ever so slightly enhanced. And I love the original 16-bit game. I love Mode 7 graphics, man. It just makes me giddy inside when I see it in any game. Partly because I lived through the revolution as a child. Well, I would have been about 11, 12, 13 or so when this started to happen. And the Mode 7 graphics games on the Super Nintendo would come out, and it was like, whoa, this is the best graphics, the coolest graphics I'd ever seen. And so visually and gameplay-wise, the game is on point. The general presentation and the package of the game looks great. They clearly put a lot of care into it. Even though they didn't craft a wholly new game, unfortunately, I have to be honest about the fact that F-Zero gameplay is still fun and still controls well, and it looks great. And they clearly cared about what they were doing for an otherwise free game, provided you're paying for NSO. I think for me, the only reason it still doesn't blow me away, and it's not something I think I'll spend a whole lot more time on now, although they're going to be adding new content and modes in the future, so it really might become something a little bit more interesting to me. But as it stands right now, even though it plays well, and I appreciate the care that they did put into it as a free-to-download spin-off weird online thing, I'm just somebody who personally doesn't love 100 racers on the course, and I don't love being restricted only to playing online. I know they do rotating Grand Prix matches and stuff, and I do think that that is very cool. But again, I'm somebody who's less into the timed online shared events, which is common in a lot of online experiences nowadays. I would rather it be, you can pick the 99 racer mode. You can pick the single player cups. You can pick local multiplayer races. You could pick the Grand Prix races. I just prefer what essentially would be a normally released game as opposed to this unique package of this F-Zero 99 experience. I love that a lot of people love it, so I'm not necessarily mad at it being what it is. Just being honest, for my tastes and for myself as a longtime F-Zero fan, it's not my preferred package and it's not my preferred experience of an F-Zero game. So that's kind of my pseudo review of the title. So let's move on from that part, and it no longer has to do with if you love it or if you don't love it or whatever. It's now discussing whether or not this helps the franchise and whether or not Nintendo might even be gauging interest in the franchise through this game. Now, it has to be stated that I don't think anyone knows for sure if that's the case. Nintendo might have just released it because it was a fun thing to do, and they said, hey, here's a cool thing we can do with F-Zero. We can try to use it to bolster interest in the Nintendo Switch Online service. Again, they put a lot of care and love into it, but I can't imagine it was a super complicated thing to put together. Because again, it's reusing courses. They made it work with online, the Grand Prix rotating modes and all that stuff. And they did that. It's not the same as building a wholly brand new game. And so maybe they just said, let's just make this fun thing with F-Zero because we can, and that's all. But there's a lot of conversation about and I struggle with how I have seen some people phrase this. I don't really think it's accurate or what people want it to be, but there is this general thought that playing this game or downloading this game or whatever when it comes to F-Zero 99 is good for the franchise and will show Nintendo that we're interested enough that they should make a new game. Now, I love that idea. No one knows if that's actually true or not. We're all just kind of assuming and guessing. But I don't know if that's 100% true. Maybe it is. But it comes down to what would they be gauging, right? They're not selling the game. So they could only be maybe gauging downloads of the game, which, okay. I mean, hey, I downloaded the game. I'm not putting a lot of time into it, but I downloaded it, so I did my part when it comes to that. Do downloads of a free game really tell them a lot about interest in future purchases of a game franchise? I don't really know, but we have to assume that's one metric Nintendo could measure on their end. Now, you could argue maybe Nintendo could measure amount of time being played, both on individual users and also just the collective Nintendo Switch user base. They can say every month F-Zero 99 is logging this many, I don't know, thousands of hours or millions of hours, whatever they would see on their end, of people playing F-Zero 99. That could also be something helpful, but they might also not be gauging that. We don't know. You could also, this might be something potentially very helpful. And I know that Netflix and video streaming services do this. I'd be curious if Nintendo and other gaming companies do this. There is a chance, and this would help the case here, that Nintendo might be able to see how many people sign up for Nintendo Switch Online and the first thing they download or play is F-Zero 99. This relates to something like Netflix because Netflix and streaming services will say, okay, did this new customer to Netflix sign up for the service and the first thing they played was Stranger Things, or the first thing they played was The Walking Dead, all these different shows or movies. I do know that streaming services have analytics around the first used product from the first time a new customer signs up. And so I would assume game companies are doing the same. And maybe it would be interesting if Nintendo can see, we announced F-Zero 99, this many new users signed up, and this many new users, the first thing they downloaded and played was F-Zero 99. Because in theory, that would be showing them that F-Zero and this game convinced people to sign up for their subscription service, which every company, Nintendo included, wants us all to be a part of. And so those are the ways that I could see F-Zero 99's existence as a free-to-download game, provided you're paying for an online service. Those are ways where I could see it maybe helping the case, and maybe Nintendo is gauging interest in the franchise as a whole based on that. But to come at it from the other angle, there is a chance that what this game is, being that it's part of a service, it's free to download, there's no direct purchases going into it, there's no money or purchasing decisions Nintendo can glean from this. Again, they can gauge download interest, but they can't gauge purchasing interest with people's money. And so that's where it gets a little bit tricky, and I don't think it's as black and white, like I said, as some people want to say. I've seen so many tweets from people who are like, if you're an F-Zero fan, don't be mad about F-Zero 99, put your money where your mouth is and download it and support it to show Nintendo that we care. And again, we don't know if that's true or not true. And I already acknowledged maybe that's true. But again, it comes down to how Nintendo might be gauging it. And because it's not something we can buy to show interest with our wallets, that's where it gets tricky. And so what I will say to kind of close this out is I certainly hope that Nintendo is using some of these metrics I talked about to gauge interest in F-Zero based on F-Zero 99 downloads or based on playtime or based on new customers playing F-Zero for the first time. I don't know if that's Nintendo's intent, but if it is, it could be some way that F-Zero 99's existence could help Nintendo decide to make future F-Zero games down the road.